She was running late, stressed about work when she saw him, a forgotten old man abandoned by the crowd. One simple act of kindness led her to discover something that would haunt her forever. Because the man she helped wasn't who anyone thought he was. And what happened next broke every rule she knew about heroes. Welcome to Hidden Heroes Stories, where the ordinary becomes extraordinary. What would you do if helping a stranger revealed a secret that could change everything? Share your thoughts below, because this story will challenge everything you believe about the people walking past you every day. Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Terminal 3. Tuesday morning, 7:47 a.m. The kind of chaos that makes even seasoned travelers feel small, rolling suitcases clicking against tile floors, gate announcements echoing in 3 languages, and the constant hum of 50,000 people trying to get somewhere else. Sarah Martinez hurried through the maze of travelers, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, phone pressed to her ear. She was a marketing executive from Denver, late for a connecting flight to Boston, dealing with a client crisis that couldn't wait. At 29, she'd perfected the art of airport navigation, head down, purpose-driven, no eye contact. That's when she saw him. Near Gate B7, beside a cluster of departure monitors, an elderly man in a wheelchair, probably in his late 70s, wearing a simple navy cardigan and pressed khaki pants. His white hair was neatly combed, his posture straight despite being seated. What struck Sarah wasn't his age or his condition. It was the way he carried himself. Patient, dignified, like he was used to waiting, used to being overlooked. The terminal surged around him like water around a stone. Businessmen rushed past without a glance. Families treated him like furniture. A group of college students bumped his wheelchair while taking selfies, not bothering to apologize. He never complained, never raised his voice, just sat there with his hands folded in his lap, weathered hands with the kind of scars that spoke of a life lived with purpose. He watched the departure board with calm, steady eyes. Sarah ended her call and found herself slowing down. Something about this man reminded her of her grandfather, the same quiet strength. Her flight to Boston wouldn't board for another 30 minutes. The client crisis could wait 5 minutes. She approached carefully. "Excuse me, sir? Are you waiting for someone?" He turned toward her, and she was struck by his eyes, pale blue, alert, kind. "No, miss. Just waiting for my flight. Gate C15. Sarah glanced at the departure board. Gate C15 was on the other side of the terminal, easily a 15-minute walk through crowds. For someone in a wheelchair, navigating the maze would be exhausting. "That's quite a trek," she said gently. "Would you like some help getting there?" The man studied her for a moment. "I don't want to be a burden." "You wouldn't be. I'm heading that direction anyway." It was a small lie, but a kind one. He nodded slowly. "That's very gracious of you. Thank you." Sarah positioned herself behind the wheelchair. "I'm Sarah, by the way." "James," he replied. "James Patterson. Pleased to meet you." As they moved through the terminal, Sarah noticed details she'd missed. James's shoes were polished but worn, speaking of habits formed over decades. His cardigan had been mended at one elbow, with tiny, precise stitches. His carry-on bag was simple black canvas with aged leather trim. Everything suggested someone who took care of his possessions because he understood their value. "Where are you heading?" Sarah asked as they navigated around a family reunion. "San Diego. My son lives there. Don't get to see him as much as I'd like." "Is this a regular visit?" James was quiet for a moment. "Not regular? No. This one's special. He's getting married next weekend." There was something in his voice, pride mixed with something else. Sadness? Regret? Sarah found herself wanting to know more about this quiet man. They moved at a steady pace, Sarah carefully steering around obstacles. She noticed how James observed everything, not with casual interest, but with systematic attention. When they passed security, his eyes tracked the officers' positions. When a child dropped a toy, he spotted it before Sarah did. "You're very observant," she commented. James chuckled softly. "Old habits. Once you learn to watch your surroundings, it's hard to stop." "Were you in security?" Another pause. "Something like that." They were halfway to gate C-15 when James's carry-on bag slipped from his lap. It was a simple black bag with a broken zipper, carefully repaired with safety pins. As Sarah bent to retrieve it, the bag fell open. Inside, she caught a glimpse of photographs, black and white images that looked decades old, men in military uniforms, aircraft, and something that made her breath catch, a distinctive metal case, partially visible beneath a manila folder. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said quickly, closing the bag and handing it back. But she'd seen enough. The metal case bore the unmistakable purple and gold ribbon of the Purple Heart. Have you ever held something that carried the weight of someone's sacrifice? That small metal case represented more pain and courage than most of us will ever know. James accepted the bag without comment, but their eyes met for a moment. In that look, Sarah saw memories he carried, stories he'd never told. "Were you in the military?" she asked softly. "A long time ago," he said simply. "What branch?" "Air Force. Pilot." Sarah felt a chill of realization. She'd grown up hearing her grandfather's stories about Vietnam-era pilots. Looking at James with new eyes, she began to understand what she might be dealing with. "Did you serve overseas?" James was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally he said, "Vietnam. 2 tours." "Think about it. How many veterans like James walk among us every day, invisible, carrying stories we'll never know?" Sarah found herself seeing the terminal differently now, the way James tracked movement, positioned himself for clear sight lines, how his hands rested on the wheelchair arms like they once rested on aircraft controls. "Thank you for your service," she said, meaning it more than ever before. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "Not everyone does anymore." Gate C-15 was packed. The 9:15 flight to San Diego was overbooked, and tension filled the air. Sarah helped James position his wheelchair in a quiet corner. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you. You've been more than kind." Sarah checked her phone. Her Boston flight was delayed. She had time. "Do you mind if I sit with you? My flight's been pushed back." James gestured to an empty chair. Company would be nice. As they sat together, Sarah studied this man who'd lived through experiences she could barely imagine. There was something about his stillness that spoke of hard-won peace. "Are you nervous about the wedding?" she asked. James's face softened. "A little. Haven't seen my daughter-in-law to be yet. Michael, my son, says she's wonderful, a teacher." "What does your son do?" "He's a counselor, helps kids who've had tough starts. Says he learned from watching me that sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen." A commotion near the gate counter interrupted them. A businessman in an expensive suit was arguing loudly with the gate agent. "This is ridiculous," the man shouted. "Do you know who I am? I fly first class because I pay for first class." The gate agent, a young woman who looked exhausted, tried to remain professional. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but we had a last-minute equipment change." "Your best isn't good enough. I have meetings worth more than you make in a year." Other passengers began staring. The young gate agent's hands were shaking. Sarah felt anger rising. But before she could say anything, she heard James's voice, quiet but clear. "Excuse me." The businessman turned toward James, his face red with fury. "What?" James's voice remained calm. "I couldn't help but overhear. You seem upset about your seating arrangement." "Damn right I'm upset. They want to stick me in coach like some nobody?" James nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. Travel can be frustrating. But that young lady is doing her job, and she doesn't deserve to be spoken to that way." The businessman's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to tell me how to speak?" "Some old man in a wheelchair who probably flies on charity tickets?" The surrounding area went quiet. Sarah felt her face flush, but James' expression didn't change. "You're right," he said mildly. "I am old, and I'm in a wheelchair, and I've learned that how we treat people says everything about who we are. Spare me the lecture, Grandpa." That's when James did something unexpected. He reached into his carry-on bag and pulled out the manila folder. From it, he withdrew a single photograph, black and white, creased with age. "This was taken in 1969, James said quietly. That's me in the cockpit. The businessman glanced dismissively, then looked again. The aircraft was an F-4 Phantom, and the young pilot wore the confident expression of someone who'd learned to fly into danger. I flew 127 combat missions over North Vietnam, James continued. Shot down twice, rescued both times by men braver than I'll ever be. The businessman's bluster was fading. So what? That was 50 years ago. James carefully returned the photograph. It has to do with recognizing that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. That young lady isn't your enemy. And taking your frustration out on her doesn't make you important. It makes you small. The revelation, the gate area, had grown silent. Then another voice cut through the quiet, the gate agent herself. "Excuse me, sir," she said, approaching James's wheelchair. "Did you say your name was Patterson?" James looked up, surprised. "Yes." "James Patterson? Captain James Patterson?" "Former captain, yes." Tears began forming in her eyes. "Sir, my grandfather was Master Sergeant Robert Chen, 1st Air Cavalry. He served as a door gunner on rescue helicopters in Vietnam." James's face went very still. "Bobby Chen. You knew him?" "I knew him." James's voice was barely a whisper. "He saved my life. September 15th, 1970. I was shot down near the DMZ. Bobby and his crew came into a hot LZ to pull me out." The gate agent, her name tag read Lisa Chen, was crying openly now. He told stories about that mission his whole life, about the pilot who kept talking to keep the crew calm. He said that pilot taught him that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing the right thing anyway. James reached out and took her hand. "Your grandfather was one of the finest men I ever knew. He talked about you until the day he passed. He said if he ever met you again, he wanted to thank you for writing the letters." "Letters?" "To the families of the men who didn't make it home. Grandpa said you wrote personal letters to every family of every pilot lost on missions you flew together." James was quiet for a long moment. "I was responsible. We all were. For each other." The transformation. The businessman stood frozen, watching this exchange. His face had gone pale. I'm sorry, I didn't know." James turned toward him with the same calm expression. "You couldn't have known, and that's exactly the point. We never know who we're dealing with. All we can do is treat each other with respect. This moment should shake every one of us. How many times have we judged someone before knowing their story?" The businessman had just learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Lisa Chen wiped her eyes. "Captain Patterson, would you mind if I made an announcement?" James shook his head gently. "That's not necessary. I'm just a passenger trying to get to my son's wedding." But Lisa was already walking to the gate counter. She picked up the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like your attention for just a moment. We have someone special with us today. Captain James Patterson, United States Air Force Vietnam veteran, is traveling to San Diego on our 9:15 flight. Captain Patterson flew 127 combat missions and saved countless lives." A hush fell over the gate area. Then, slowly, people began to stand. First one person, then another. Then the entire gate area rose to their feet in silent applause. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she watched James sit straighter in his wheelchair. When did you last see an entire room stand up for someone who never asked for recognition? Among those standing was the businessman, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Sir," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." He walked over to Lisa Chen and spoke quietly. When he returned, he carried a first-class boarding pass. "Sir, I'd like you to have my seat. It's not charity, it's honor where honor's due." As the flight began to board, something remarkable happened. Without any announcement, the other passengers stepped aside to let James board first. It wasn't formal, just ordinary people showing respect naturally. Sarah helped him to the jet bridge where the aircraft captain was waiting. "Captain Patterson," the pilot said, offering a crisp salute, "welcome aboard. It's an honor to have you flying with us today." James returned the salute with surprising steadiness. "Thank you, Captain. Safe flights." As they moved down the jet bridge, James turned to Sarah. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness today." "I'm glad I didn't walk past," Sarah said. "Meeting you reminds me that there are heroes everywhere. We just have to take the time to see them." James smiled, the first truly bright smile she'd seen from him all day. Heroes are usually the last people to call themselves that, but kindness, that's something anyone can choose. Sarah watched James's flight taxi away from the terminal. Her own flight to Boston was finally boarding, but she found herself reluctant to leave. The encounter had left her feeling changed, more aware of the stories that surrounded her every day. On the flight to Boston, she found herself studying her fellow passengers differently. The elderly woman across the aisle who sat with perfect posture. Was she a former nurse who'd saved lives? The quiet man in the window seat who tracked every sound. Did he have military training? The teenager with the vintage band t-shirt. What dreams was she carrying? Sarah thought about James's words. We never know who we're dealing with or what they've been through. In her rush through life, how many heroes had she passed without noticing? How many people with extraordinary stories had she dismissed as ordinary? When she landed in Boston, Sarah made a decision. Instead of catching a taxi to her hotel, she took the subway. Instead of eating room service alone, she went to a small restaurant near her hotel. Instead of scrolling through her phone, she talked to the elderly waiter who served her dinner. His name was Miguel, and he'd immigrated from El Salvador 40 years ago. He'd worked 3 jobs to put his children through college: dishwasher at night, construction during the day, weekend shifts at a grocery store. Now he was helping raise his grandchildren while his own children pursued careers in medicine and engineering. He spoke about his family with the same quiet pride she'd heard in James's voice. "Family is everything," Miguel said as he refilled her water glass. "All the rest of it, the money, the success, the recognition, it doesn't mean anything if you don't have people who matter to you." 3 days later, Sarah received a friend request from Michael Patterson. Along with it was a message. "Hi, Sarah. My dad told me about your kindness at the airport. I wanted you to know that meeting you meant more to him than you might realize." The wedding was beautiful, by the way. Dad walked me down the aisle in his chair, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Thank you for being one of the good ones. Michael. Attached was a photo from the wedding. James, wearing a crisp blue suit, sat beside his son at the altar. His face was radiant with joy and pride. What struck Sarah most was James's expression. The quiet sadness she'd sensed at the airport was gone, replaced by pure happiness. He was surrounded by people who knew his worth. Sarah saved the photo and found herself returning to it often in the weeks that followed. It reminded her of something important that was easy to forget in the rush of modern life. Every person has a story worth knowing, worth honoring, worth protecting. The businessman at the airport had learned this lesson the hard way, in front of a crowd that witnessed his transformation from entitled anger to humble respect. But Sarah had learned it differently, through choosing to see dignity in a quiet moment, through offering help without expecting anything in return, through taking the time to listen to someone who had stories worth hearing. In her marketing work, Sarah began incorporating this awareness. Instead of focusing solely on demographics and target audiences, she started thinking about the real people behind the data. What were their stories? What challenges were they facing? What dreams were they pursuing? Her campaigns became more human, more authentic, more connected to the experiences of real people living real lives. Her clients noticed the difference. More importantly, Sarah noticed the difference in herself. She started volunteering at the local VA hospital, reading to veterans who spent long days alone. She learned about the Korean War from a former Marine who'd been at Chosin Reservoir. She heard about Desert Storm from a former Air Force mechanic who'd kept the planes flying. She listened to stories from Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who were still processing experiences too fresh to fully understand. Each story reminded her of the lesson James had taught her. Courage comes in many forms. Heroism is often quiet, and the most powerful gift we can give each other is simply paying attention. Are you ready to see the world differently? Because once you understand this truth, you can't unsee it. Every person around you becomes a potential story, a hidden hero, a lesson waiting to be learned. 6 months later, Sarah was back at O'Hare. As she walked through Terminal 3, she found herself automatically scanning for people who might need help. That's when she saw a familiar figure in a wheelchair near Gate B7. James Patterson sat in the same spot, wearing the same navy cardigan. But this time, he wasn't alone. A young woman sat beside him, tall, with dark hair and a warm smile. "James?" she called out. He looked up, his face lighting with recognition. "Sarah, what a wonderful surprise." "Good to see you again. How are you?" "I'm excellent. Sarah, I'd like you to meet my daughter-in-law, Maria." Maria shook Sarah's hand warmly. "I've heard so much about you. Thank you for taking care of him." "He took care of me," Sarah said. "Taught me important lessons about paying attention." James chuckled. "We're heading to Chicago. There's a squadron reunion this weekend. First time we've all been together in 15 years. Sarah felt the same warmth from 6 months ago. "Would you like some company getting to your gate?" James smiled. "We'd be honored." As they walked together, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. She'd learned that heroism isn't about grand gestures. It's about choosing kindness over indifference, seeing dignity where others see invisibility. James had taught her that the most powerful stories don't announce themselves with fanfare. They wait quietly in airport terminals and grocery stores, carried by people who've learned that true strength is often silent. At James's gate, Sarah helped him get settled. As she prepared to leave, James reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." "Thank you," she replied, "for reminding me what matters." As Sarah walked away, she heard Maria ask James, "She's special, isn't she?" "Yes," James replied. "She's one of the ones who sees." And in the end, maybe that's what heroism really is, not the dramatic salvation of many, but the gentle transformation of one person at a time, carried forward through ordinary moments of extraordinary kindness. The stories that matter most don't shout, they whisper. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we're in the right place at the right time to hear them. 6 months after that life-changing encounter at the airport, Sarah found herself at a veteran support event in Denver. The local VA hospital was hosting an evening dedicated to military tribute stories, and she had volunteered to help organize the heartwarming stories segment. As she walked through the decorated hall, she realized how much James had transformed her understanding of what real heroes look like. The event was packed with touching stories from the community. Families shared inspiring stories about their loved ones who had served. A young widow spoke about her husband's sacrifice in Afghanistan. An elderly woman read a letter from her father, a World War II veteran who had never spoken about his service until his final days. But it was the empty chair at the front of the room that caught Sarah's attention. A simple placard read, "For all the silent heroes whose stories remain untold." She thought immediately of James. How many others like him were out there, carrying their service quietly, never asking for recognition? This wasn't just about individual stories anymore. This was about creating a movement of veteran recognition, ensuring that patriotic content like theirs reached people who needed to hear it. Sarah realized that emotional tribute events like this one were exactly what communities needed, spaces where real heroes could be honored not for their fame, but for their service. As the evening concluded, an elderly veteran approached Sarah. "You know," he said with a gentle smile, "these memorial stories events are important, but it's the everyday moments that matter most, like someone taking time to help a stranger in a wheelchair. That's where real heroism lives." Sarah nodded, thinking of James once more. The most powerful military tribute wasn't always found in parades or ceremonies. Sometimes it was as simple as recognizing the quiet dignity of a man sitting alone in an airport terminal, waiting patiently for his flight home. This realization would shape everything Sarah did moving forward. She began incorporating veteran support initiatives into her marketing work, helping her clients understand that authentic patriotic content resonated because it honored real people with real stories. The inspiring stories weren't just content. They were bridges connecting communities to the heroes who lived among them every day. So I ask you, have you ever met someone like James? A quiet hero whose story was hidden behind an ordinary exterior? Share their memory in the comments below. Let's make sure these voices are never forgotten. If this story touched you, subscribe to Hidden Heroes Stories. We're here to make sure that the most important stories, the ones that teach us about dignity, courage, and kindness, continue to be told. Until next time, remember, heroes are everywhere. We just have to take the time to see them.